Nad and I are doing a project on Drombeg. We're here at Drombeg now. So I'm here with Ronan Murray, an expert on Drombeg, and I'm just going to be interviewing him. Is that okay?
Yes, fine, thank you.
Okay, so when was the circle built?
The stone circle was built about 3,000 years ago. They have it carbon dated at about 1100 BC, which put it in about the Middle Bronze Age. Middle.
Well, my second question is, what is the significance of the stones?
Well, the stones were used to make alignments between the sun, the moon, and the stars, the polar axis. It helped them know where true north was, north and south, east and west, which they aligned to the equinox, the spring equinox. But it was their calendar. I mean, it showed them what time of the year they were. They knew that when it was time to plant, time to harvest. It was their annual clock. They could actually follow the light of sunrise and sunset, the light and shadows, and know exactly where they are in the year. And the sun would rise at a certain point, and then in the summer, and then on the opposite side of the year, it would actually set down through the V-notch in the distant horizon over there, and they would know. And the sun would just track like a clock, an annual clock, so they would always know what day, what year it is. So, yeah.
So my next question is, why was it built within the ocean view?
Because they wanted to make sure exactly where the sun rose. And it was very specific, and that could be a bit complicated to answer that, but they wanted to know the size of the sun as it rose up from the horizon, and they didn't want it obstructed by hilltops, hills and trees and such like that. So it was a very flat, level surface for the sun to rise. So they knew as soon as the sun came up on the horizon, that actually was real sunrise, and they used that in which to orient the stone circle in a very specific way.
So the next question is, how different is life compared to now and then?
Well, when I first began studying Drombeg and doing the research and making these discoveries, it was a great mystery to me. But after 10 years of really working with Drombeg and being here on all the different events of sunrise, sunset, moon rises and moonsets, solstices, equinox and all that, one thing that I found is that I don't think we as people are that much different than the people 3,000 years ago. I think they were hugely intelligent in certain ways that we aren't anymore. Yeah. They had a better understanding of the earth and sky. They were more connected to the earth and the natural environment. But I think as far as intelligence, the Irish race of people 3,000 years ago in the Bronze Age were hugely intelligent. They knew numbers, they added, subtracted, multiplied, divided. They used basic math to profound levels. They used basic shapes of triangles and circles and angles, surveying and all this. I mean, everything that we do today, they were doing back then in just a much different way, more connected to the land and the sky.
So my next question is, are there any secrets that a lot of people don't know?
The real secret of Drombeg, as far as everything that's in this book, it points to numbers. Numbers were very, very important to them, but not the kind of numbers like we use. To them, numbers were things. They were building relationships using numeral harmonies in which to create this amazing structures out here. So the secrets of Drombeg really are found in its numbers, in their profound use of basic numbers, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and using numbers to be able to understand the sky, understand the earth. And I'm still, after 10 years, still blown away with the things I discover about this place.
Yeah. And if I did not mention, he actually wrote the book.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So he has, how many books did you do? 2?
Well, actually, there's 2 versions. There's a first edition, and this is a much more expanded second edition that actually proves a lot of the alignments in the first edition. But it's been a lot of work and very rewarding and very hard work.
Yeah.
But it was worth every bit of it, because to see the Irish race of people 3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And like we were laughing, that'd be about 300 U's. We
Yeah.
take 300 U's and go backwards in time.
Yeah.
That's a race of people that were doing extraordinary things,
Yeah.
really smart stuff, right?
So, how do they move such heavy stones? Just like you showed me earlier, yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, apart from using fulcrums and all that, like just leverage, getting stones in place by bouncing on either side. And actually, the archaeologist Edward Fiadh in 1959, when he excavated the circle, he actually excavated one of them too deep, and one of the stones fell over, and he actually used just 3 people in which to be able to put them right back in place. So, apart from setting the stones, they can be done with 3 to 5 people, but the dragging of the stones, I would say that they probably had cords, a lot of ropes, and they're just dragging these things along, because as you can see, the stones in Drombeg are not huge stones like in Stonehenge, and these are more manageable stones to be able to put into place. Yeah?
Can you explain the well and its significance?
Yes, actually, that whole side, and actually if you wanted to pan that side, that whole side of the site is actually more dedicated to the moon goddess. And now when we come back on this side where we have the stone circle, because that side of the circle is associated to water and the polar axis. And here, with the stone circle, we're really looking at the relationship to the sun, to sunrise and sunset. And this whole site is a great union between the sun side of the site and the moon goddess side of the site. So we have sun god here, moon goddess there, and a great union between them.
So, this will be our last question.
Okay.
What is the most important thing we can learn from the site?
That's actually a very, very good question, because apart from discovering all these things, if it has no meaning today, then what's all this for? What was all this work for? Something that I've discovered about this place, and I think it could be summed up in 3 words, is balance, harmony, and equality. Everything was made to be equal. Everything was balanced by numbers. They tried to create a harmony between the opposing elements and seasons and cycles of their world, right? And they brought that into an amazing harmony in this place using numbers, basic geometry, basic math, and this place is like a church. It's just a sacred place.
So, would you like to give us like a tour on the place?
Sure, if you like.
We're doing it this way.
Yeah. Well, actually, one thing, Aoife, that was a lot of fun today is learning about where north, south, east, and west is in the circle, right? And if you take that, and we can do what we did before, where we can actually see that this stone up here, right? This stone where I'm standing, and if you'll come over a little bit more this way, right, and a little more, okay. So now, Aoife and I are lined up to the polar axis, right? And this was their true north and south axis. But they chose the spring equinox to make the 90-degree axis to this polar axis. So you turn 90 degrees towards that other stone, right? And that stone there, right, which I'm going to now go to, this stone here, that Aoife is pointing to, they use this very sheer face here to align the equinox sunrise. And this made the 90-degree axis to the polar axis, so now they had their 4 directions. So they now knew true north, true south, true east, true west, based on the polar axis, the star axis, and the spring equinox. Right? Now, to just describe these stones, you can notice that they're in pairs. these two particular stones represent the equinox, right? And once you point to the spring equinox stone with the rod there, which is the spring equinox stone, and show them the face. Okay, so that one over there, and this one.
This is the autumn equinox.
Exactly. So this is the autumn equinox one, right? So we have two pairs because the equinox splits the year not exactly in half, but they chose the spring equinox in which to line up to the polar axis, which is very curious because that's a time of light and life and, you know, new life and flowers and spring.
As you told me earlier,
yeah?
you said you were showing me, and this is just kind of another question. How would have they measured the circle?
Ah, very good. On this particular stone here, this is the winter solstice stone. This is the summer solstice stone, and then that being the equinox stone. Very interesting that you have them just set up this way. But this particular stone, the winter solstice stone, on this particular side, we see this indentation, right? Because we had to figure out that at some point they did use measurements, right? And along with angles. And you'll notice that the hand fits perfectly into here, right? Now, they had a system where 4 fingers at the knuckles across the side, that was 1 unit of measure. And that was divided into 10 parts, and 10 of these hand widths then made their survey rod. So that's how they were able to make the size of this particular stone circle. But this indentation is what is left over. It's like a mark, like a signature of the width of 1 decimeter equal to our metric system. So the chieftain's hand, this particular chieftain's hand, was 1 decimeter wide. But now, like if Aoife was the chieftain and she puts her hand in there, well, we'd be measuring her hand a bit differently. Her hand would be that wide. So her measuring rod that would actually make the circle would actually be smaller, but all the numbers and angles would be proportionate. So it wouldn't matter if it was much smaller or huge, because these angles and relationships were meant to extend all the way out into the sky. And that's what they're for. Just scalable geometry, that it doesn't matter how small you go, how large you go. So that's the chieftain stone. As we look here, this is this would be considered the winter portal, and they go in pairs. So a winter portal and a summer portal, the winter stone portal, right, and the summer stone create an opening for winter. This is the winter sunset straight through to the V-notch, all right? Now, when we come to summer, we're now using the summer stone and the spring equinox stone, and the path of the sunlight comes through here. And then we move this way, where we then have the spring equinox, right? So, Aoife,
yeah?
I just wanted to ask you, what, like this particular stone, this real flat one, do you know what they call that one? That's actually called the recumbent stone. And they call it recumbent because it means flat lying down on the site, okay? But that particular stone, why do you think it's shaped the way it is? What does that remind you of? Like, if this is a sacred place.
An altar or something?
Exactly. So that's where they made their offerings. Like they'd be thanking God there. They could actually put their offerings and...
So, can you explain all of the stuff here?
Right. Well, this is an amazing place here. This was almost like a workshop, right? Even though they call this place, you know, the Fulacht is mostly known as an ancient cooking site, but the way this thing has been laid out and the meticulousness that they did in making an alignment to that stone circle, the certain distance that this hut is from the circle, and the very specific numbers that they used in which to do that, all relating to sun, moon, star axis. Like, for example, this here is the Fulacht itself, right? This here, in this spot, right? Okay, let me see that there. Let's see that. This spot here, right, is the fire pit, right? So what they would have done back then is they would have had a big roasting fire in here, and they'd have heated up the stones, right? And then they would have rolled them into here, and then it would make this very hot so they can boil up the water, right? But let me ask you a question, see if you can, how do you think they fill this? What makes this thing have water in it?
I'm actually not too sure.
Okay, because I was confused for years. I'd come down here and go, what makes this thing fill? Because I didn't know if it was a well or not, right? But you'll notice up in here, you see all those stones up along the way? All these stones in between these huts?
Yeah.
Up along here? That was actually the channel that they built. So they put these stones because they were draining they were directing the groundwater. There's water that flows under the ground.
Yeah.
And they directed it straight into this Fulacht, so underneath this, so the groundwater raises and lowers it. Groundwater's high, Fulacht's high. Groundwater's low, Fulacht's low. And this is a much different thing. So this, Aoife, is an amazing site. This is actually the only thing that was here when they started all of this. This is a well, and this is a natural underground spring well, right? This one, the Fulacht they built and fed it by groundwater, directing it, but this one is always running, and it's still running now. It's still functioning now. And you'll notice, you see out the back there?
Yes.
That's actually the overflow drain. And as you can see right now, you see how this is kind of gooey here?
Yeah.
Right? The reason this is getting gooey is because that drain is plugged up, right? And if that drain gets plugged up, the water backs up in the spring and floods the hut, right? So we're going to go take a quick look over at the drainage there and check it. You know, we're going to be like them back 3,000 years ago. We're going to go check the drain, make sure it's working okay, all right? So we're going to go do that. So here, if you can see, you see how it's very stagnant? It's not moving very fast. You see how that's not moving very fast?
Yes.
Right? It's barely moving. It's gotten very, very stagnant. So what they would have been doing back then is they'd have been reaching in here and they've been pulling up all this stuff.
So the water isn't deep?
No, not deep at all. And so they would clear out this drain, right, to get the water to be flowing. And so like right now, it's a small bit clogged up. So they would come in here and they would just start cleaning all this up. So they'd be taking all this out. See how it's starting to move now?
Would this all like be fresh water?
Exactly, this is underground fresh water, right? And so now they'd be cleaning this out, and see there's a little bit stuck there. So take that out, there it goes, see? There we go. See how the water's starting to drain now?
Yeah.
Now, see this is different than the groundwater, and see this is all clogged right now. So we come in here and pull all this up.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, look at it go now. You see? But you see now, can you see actually how it's starting to trickle down?
Yeah.
Right? And it was all clogged before. And when this backs up, then the hut floods. And that's why it was all getting mucky in there. So we come here, we'll just clean more of that out.
What is usually clogging it?
Well, you see what it is it's all this, it's just moss and different grasses and stuff.
Yeah.
So, but there would have been a person here, right,
Yeah.
that lived in those upper huts. And they probably had an assistant with them, right?
Yeah.
Said, go out there and clean the drains, it's all clogged up there. so the assistant would be down here cutting wood and cleaning
Exactly what you were doing.
Doing exactly what I'm doing right now, just making sure that the drain works just really well. And can you see how that's flowing now?
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Okay, so
And did they build all around this with stones and everything?
yeah, and see actually what would happen is that they would be making the fire, right?
Yeah.
And they're rolling And they're rolling the stones, heating this up. And actually, I'm going to wash my hands at the moment. So, there we go. So, they would heat the stones in there.
Yes.
But sometimes the stones would crack because they couldn't keep using the stones all the time. Because once they fractured, they become dangerous. They like explode or something, right? So they would actually take those stones and the cracked stones that they were finished, and they just start putting them in the back of the, building the wall. Cracked stones, filling in, making more walls as they built further out. And they did the same up there in the upper huts. They would take the cracked stones.
Was there any particular type of stones, or could they just find any stones and put them in?
Well, certain stones can be kind of explosive. You got to be careful the ones you're using, so that that they're the right ones.
Yeah.
And okay, so
that would be one in the water there. The stone. So
right.
you've done the well and the stone circle, but what is this place that they built here?
Good question. This is these are the huts, the upper huts, and you notice they're in a nice high ground. It's away from the water, down in the lower hut, right? And they actually built, you can actually see how it's kind of mucky over there.
Yeah.
But they drained the water away from this hut so it wouldn't flood, okay? And this would have been what I call like where they would have met, maybe all the really smart people of the community, like the elder and maybe their holy person.
How much would have been in a community around?
Well, if you look in the fields below Drombeg there, just farms. There could have been, if you could just imagine, a bunch of huts all around the area out there. They've been living like us, just like we do, And they would have been farming their lands, and and this was their church, their sacred place. Right?
So most of the things here were built by them.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The only thing that was here, when you look at this whole flat terrace with all these stones and everything, there was no stone circle here. None of these huts were here. None of that was here. The only thing that was on this whole area was that well. That just up out of the ground, they found this amazing well, and it was just burbling up with fresh water. So that started everything, right? And they aligned that well. Again, remember the polar axis over there? They aligned that well straight to the polar axis. But more importantly, you asked me what these were. Because you can see they're connected, aren't they?
Yeah, we're just going to walk through here.
Yeah, so this is almost like a hallway, right? Now, this would have been the place probably where they lived, right? Because this is a hearth, right?
It's a hearth.
So this would have been their fire pit, their fireplace,
yeah.
right? So they might have had their tripod there, and they're cooking their food and their meals here, right? So this would have been a place where maybe the elder and the assistant would have lived here. And it's very small, right? But you can imagine that the walls, they would have had probably stones stacked up here, made a big thatched roof, right? And a pole, and the archaeology plans show there was a pole in the middle of this one, and there was a pole in the middle of, exactly, just like that. So that would have been sitting up way high.
Yeah.
And then they would have built, with thatching, a thatched roof down. And so then they have this hallway, and then over here they'd have done the same, where they have another post, and up it goes, right? And then they put the thatched roof in.
What have they used for their house?
What do you mean?
Well, what materials? Or would they just use rocks, or would they use straw?
No, see, in a lot of them back then they were made out of just like wood,
Yeah.
But this, they wanted to be very permanent, so they made the foundation to be like stone, and then they probably built up on top of the foundation of these stones, and with wood and thatching.
Yeah.
Cool. And they probably slept in there.
Yeah.
And then imagine every year they would have these big meetings, where the whole community would get together, and the important people, the chieftain and the elders would get together, and they'd probably just be sitting right along here, just sitting, having a council meeting, talking about what they're going to do with the community. Seeing how best to, provide food for them, how to make sure that they stay healthy and protected from any invaders. So this was their site. This whole thing was all very, very interconnected. The stone circle was their worship of the sun. Here they worshiped the moon and the sacred waters of the earth. and they created a great union between these two systems of the sun and moon, and they lined it to that, what place up there? The north. The polar axis up there. So that's it. So did I do okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, Aoife okay? Good?
Yeah.
Anything else you want to ask me?
No, it's very interesting and you learn a lot about it.
Yes.
It's just interesting, yeah. So how long did you spend on doing it?
10 years. 10 years. A lot of rain. I came out here many, many mornings to try to understand, like even right now we can see the moon coming up.
Yes.
But the fact that that moon's coming up right now, the time we'd really want to see when it's coming up is on the equinox or the solstice, the moonrise and moonset, and we find how it kind of fits with the sun system, right?
Yes.
Because that's what they were doing, bringing a great union between the sun and the moon. Yeah, so anything else?
No, that's really it.
Well, I really thank you very much for the interview.
I really enjoyed having you here.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice one. Cheers. Thank you. Cheers.